very pleased to welcome today David Calabro from the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. Since 2020, he is the curator of Eastern Christian and Islamic manuscript, but he also already joined the library in 2016 as a postdoctoral fellow after his PhD in Near Eastern languages and civilization at the University of Chicago. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and as we all can read, you will be talking about ritual power in Situ and Syriac protective charms. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And I should clarify, I used to be the curator of both Islamic and Eastern Christian manuscripts. Currently, I'm the curator only of the Eastern Christian ones. We hired a new person for the Islamic manuscripts, just in case anybody's wondering about that. Okay, so in northern Mesopotamia during the 18th and 19th centuries, priestly scribes of the East Syriac Christian tradition produced small codices and scrolls that were inscribed with charms against all kinds of dangers. The codices typically go by the title Kathavta Danutara Davnainasha, writing of the protection of humans, or some variation of this, yielding the conventional title Book of Protection. Over the past 2 centuries, these artifacts have ended up in libraries and private collections across the world. There are approximately 60 examples whose current location is known. Many more examples have been documented in some way, but are currently missing or destroyed. The study of these charms has in the past several years seen a dramatic increase. One of the most significant recent advances in the study of these charms is the discovery of earlier antecedents, including the manuscripts from Turfan, dating to around the 9th century, and a pair of amulets from Hadath Grotto in Lebanon, dating to the 13th century, which have appeared in studies by Erica Hunter and Gabi Abu Samra. In addition to providing early exemplars for the textual history of the charms, these finds are significant because they come from documented archaeological contexts. The finds at Hadath Grotto are notable in this regard because they were found on the bodies of the people interred there or near them. One was found in a child's jacket sleeve, while the other, containing the anathema of Mar Abdisho, as was published by Gabi Abu Samra, was in a leather pouch tied to a leather belt. However, as far as the 18th and 19th century artifacts are concerned, their study since Hermann Golantz published his study of the Book of Protection more than a century ago, has continued to rely on examples found in Western libraries and private collections. What is missing from these examples is a sense of their real-life context. In what manner were they produced? How were they carried? Beyond being worn by clients, were the text artifacts read and used in other ways? How would the texts have been categorized by the community that transmitted them? The answer to these questions will inevitably involve careful reconstruction based on multiple types of sources. Some help in this regard comes from digital manuscript preservation, imaging manuscripts in the communities that have preserved them, and then making those images accessible to scholars via online platforms. This process permits scholars to study manuscripts in the context in which they are preserved by their original communities. In this presentation, I will highlight some of the contributions of digital preservation work to understanding this corpus. I will start by giving an overview of manuscripts digitized by HMML that contain East Syriac charms. Then I will discuss 3 topics using examples from these and other manuscripts. First, the decoration of the charms. Second, the scribes who produced them. And third, the purpose for which the manuscripts were produced. It needs to be emphasized that studying the text artifacts in the context in which they are preserved, which is now possible thanks to digitization, is not the same as studying the text artifacts in their original contexts. These artifacts have been removed from their setting in life and have been placed on a shelf to become an object of study, even if the shelf belongs to the original community. However, I would suggest that digital manuscript preservation allows us to get much closer to the original contexts than would otherwise be possible. First, it permits wide accessibility to objects that would otherwise be difficult or impossible for most people to access. Second, it allows us to view entire indigenous collections rather than individual manuscripts selected because of their value. These two factors together drastically increase both the quantity and the scope of data to the point that they change the questions we can ask. In the end, this yields a more accurate reconstruction of the setting and life of these artifacts. I will now give a brief overview of HMML manuscripts of the Book of Protection. Two manuscripts of the Book of Protection are found in the library of the Chaldean Sisters of Mary Immaculate in Ain Kawa, Iraq. The first of these, CSDMA 16, is a complete manuscript dated in the colophon to 1837. It measures 8.5 by 6 centimeters. It contains 28 prayers and charms, starting with the standard introductory prayers and ending with the hotama, or conclusion. CSDMA 18 is an imperfect codex, both the beginning and the end of which are wanting. Thus, there is no extant colophon and the date is uncertain. It measures 8 by 5.5 centimeters. On the leaves that remain, there are 25 charms, starting with the anathema of Mar Abisho and ending with a pair of charms against incantations. In the Qalb al-Aqdas Chaldean Church in Tel Kepe, Iraq, is in a manuscript collection digitized by HMML, is a manuscript of the Syriac translation of Giovanni Minocchio's commentary on Revelation, QACCT 104, dated 1808. At the end of the manuscript is an assortment of loose leaves from multiple manuscripts, among which are 32 leaves belonging to a manuscript of the Book of Protection. Some of the leaves are only partially extant. Here I show a preliminary list of the contents as far as I've been able to identify at present. Note that the foliation does not match the original order of leaves in the manuscript, and I haven't been able to identify all of the contents yet, but this is a work in progress. Finally, the Library of the Dominican Fathers of Mosul contains one manuscript, DFM 417, that contains the Book of Protection. The manuscript is unusual compared to other copies of the Book of Protection, a fact to which I will return. The title given to the book in the finis at the end of the text is actually Sfarsamane, Book of Medicines. And the book is actually joined to a copy of the actual Syriac Book of Medicines, copied by the same scribe. This join seems to have happened secondarily, as is evident from the wear on the last leaf of the Book of Protection and the occurrence of an intervening leaf bearing reader's notes, which seems to have been the original front flyleaf of the Book of Medicines. The Book of Medicines has a colophon dated to 1883. The Book of Protection in this manuscript lacks a colophon, but it can be roughly dated to the same time period since it is by the same scribe. This manuscript of the Book of Protection contains 50 prayers and charms. And I hate to rush through this. It would be nice to go in detail through all of the contents, but this will take a large amount of time, and there are lots of things I want to cover. So hopefully in the video of this presentation, you'll be able to pause here and analyze more closely. I should also mention here that there are other manuscripts that are related to the tradition of the Book of Protection, but that are not actual examples of the book. These include charms inscribed on margins and flyleaves, and even a 1928 study on the Book of Protection by Raymond Tonneau in manuscript form, DFM 373, that includes copies of charms. There are also West Syriac priests' manuals that contain materials that are very similar to the Book of Protection in Arabic, Garshuni, and Syriac, which are listed here, or at least some examples are here. There may be others that haven't been adduced yet. This presentation, however, will focus on actual copies of the Book of Protection in the East Syriac sphere. When we survey the illustrations and other decorations of manuscripts of the charms, one finds a certain naive style consistently used, although the levels of artistic skill vary. The style includes the following characteristics: human figures shown frontally, while animals are shown in profile; human and animal figures composed of simple shapes. The human figures often wear a striped turban. The scimitars that are shown tend to be monochrome and have broad curved blades. And in the illustrations, human figures, in some of the human figures, the arms and shoulders of the figure form a continuous band. When horses are shown with riders, the rider's waistline coincides with the outline of the horse's back. And so the rider's legs are either hidden behind the horse or they're shown riding side saddle in front. And then there's a common motif of a saint spearing an evil creature, and the saint can be either mounted or in some manuscripts standing. So here are some examples of these, showing these characteristics. This image is from the manuscript from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. It's dated 1734. And you can see here the standing saint, use of simple shapes. And on the right, in the illustration there, you can see some of the monochrome weapons, including scimitars. And this example is from the Houghton Library at Harvard University, number 156. This one is dated 1827. And you can see here a mounted saint. The saint is shown with his legs hidden behind the horse. And this example is from the Rylands Library in Manchester. It's dated 1795. And so you can see, in this case, the saint again is standing, spearing the angel of death. This is Marzai, by the way, the saint is. I didn't explain in the other pictures who the saint is, but anyway, moving on. So this image, these images are from a manuscript from the Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was digitized by Himmel, and it's dated 1615. So about a century earlier than the Floruit of the Book of Protection, as far as we can tell at this point from the manuscripts. This manuscript contains the metrical life of Rabban Hormiz by Sargis Barwakhle of Azerbaijan, and a collection of Turgame by Abdishol Barbricha. At the beginning of the manuscript is a misplaced leaf that appears to be from this same manuscript. The handwriting, decorative scheme, colors, and size of the leaf are identical to the rest of the manuscript. The illustration, however, is clearly an antecedent to the representation of the mounted Rabban Hormizd, as found in later copies of the Book of Protection. So we see here Rabban Hormizd spearing a demon, and what may be a mad dog and a saint and a snake are shown underneath the horse. The text above the illustration is not a charm from the Book of Protection, at least as far as we know at this point, but it's apparently a prayer of Rabban Hormizd, although it does mention his well-known power of protection against rabid dogs. This manuscript shown here is actually an evangelion, or a gospel lectionary, dated to 1723. This is from the Dominican Fathers of Mosul collection. And it shows an example of this motif, very common in the Book of Protection, of Saint George, or Margi Wargis, spearing a dragon. And in this other example, also from the Dominican Friars of Mosul collection, I think I may have been saying Dominican Fathers. It should be Dominican Friars of Mosul. I apologize for that. I see the DFM there, and my mind inserts whatever I'm thinking of at the moment. Anyway, it's DFM 13, and 12 in this case. And this is another evangelion from the 17th or 18th century, showing on the left Palm Sunday, Jesus entering Jerusalem, and on the right, doubting Thomas touching the resurrected Lord, with Simon Peter on the left. And you can see here some of those same characteristics with the striped turban, the rider with the legs shown behind the horse, and the continuous arms and shoulders of the human figures. So we can see from these examples that the decorative style that we find in the Book of Protection for the illustrations was really a widespread style that's found in other manuscripts as well. These images are from CSDMA 18, a copy of the Book of Protection from the Sisters of Mary in Ainkawa. And this includes some interesting variations of the style. So the first one, showing the one on the left, showing Mar Abdisho subduing the demonesses Taba'a and Lilith, is reminiscent of the ancient Mesopotamian Master of Animals motif found on cylinder seals, which, by the way, were beginning to be discovered and published in the same region at the same time period when this manuscript was produced. So there may be some connection there. I don't know. I think it's likely that there's some connection given the closeness of the motif, but it's difficult to prove this. There's no smoking gun, so to speak. And on the right is Saint George spearing the dragon. And here he's shown standing rather than mounted. And again, a very interesting variant of the artistic style that we find in other manuscripts. ASOM 230 attests to similar illustrations employed in Syriac Orthodox contexts in the same geographical region. This manuscript comes from the Syriac Orthodox Archdiocese of Mosul. It is a theological miscellany dating to the 18th or 19th century. And so on the right, you can see this demon with a similar monochrome curved scimitar, similar to what we see in the Book of Protection. And inside the demon is an inscription in Arabic Garshuni that reads, Aidan lamma yaghsil yadayhi ash-shammas yaqul hadihi. And also, when he shall wash his hands, the deacon shall say this. And then the prescribed speech is written underneath, also in Arabic Garshuni, and it says, come, let us wash and cleanse and be purified. That is the outward washing for our inward blood. Even as with David the king and prophet, we cry and say, hasten, wash me of my iniquities and of my sins. Amen. So this this is not really part of the surrounding text. The surrounding text is a totally different thing. But for whatever reason, somebody has noticed a blank leaf here and put this illustration with the prayer, which is really a ritual prayer. And note here too that the demon's hands and feet are pierced by lines, probably to incapacitate them. Since these images had a performative function, the saints in the images actually are thought of as piercing the demons. And so the demons are potentially dangerous. And so that you have the incapacitation of the hands and feet here. One of the most exciting insights from digital manuscripts relates to the scribes of manuscripts of the Book of Protection. These scribes are known from the colophons of the manuscripts. In some cases, we can match these scribes with other manuscripts by the same scribes that are known elsewhere. Some of these people are known figures. For instance, we know of the Archdeacon Eliah, son of Stephanos, son of the priest Mama, son of the priest Shimon, son of the priest Talia, son of the priest Yaakov, son of Mawana, who inscribed 2 copies of the Book of Protection in 1733 and 1793, a span of 60 years, one of the widest spans known for these scribes. Others we could mention include Giwargis, son of Zai'ah, son of the priest Lagan, of the family of the bishop Yohanan from Shavane, Iran, who was active from 1803 to 1818, and Zarwandad Bar Sapar, nephew of Marjan, or Mar Yohanan, bishop and hegumen of the monastery of Ezekiel near Rostaka, residing in Rabnat, who was active from 1804 to 1813. So a lot of this information does not come from the colophons of the manuscripts of the Book of Protection. It comes from other manuscripts in which we know of these same scribes. In this kind of research, David Wilmshurst's magnum opus, The Ecclesiastical Organization of the Church of the East, is a great resource. But there are some things that digital manuscripts allow one to do that go beyond the possibilities of print books. For instance, using digital manuscripts, one can compare the handwriting and decorative styles. One can also look at the actual texts and colophons to get additional information that tables like those in Wilmshurst might not include. And of course, one can often find many additional manuscripts by these scribes. In the end, this permits us to get an overall view of the work of these scribes, and in some cases, even a biographical outline. Here I will give a quick overview of 3 cases in which digital manuscripts make a big difference. First, there's a scribe, Saliba Bargamo of Timar, who was active from 1770 to 1803. He was a priest, and he inscribed, as far as we know now, at least 8 manuscripts. 2 of them are copies or manuscripts of the Book of Protection, including Berlin Zachau 95 and Berlin MS Or Oct 553. He also copied a manuscript of Lives of the Saints, CPB 195, which is found in Himmel's collections. He was from Timar in northwestern Iran, but he lived in nearby Salmas for most of his career. And we know from the colophons, where it mentions his father as Menaha, or at rest, it means the late or deceased. We know from this that his father died by 1779 at the latest. These are some manuscripts by Saliba. So on the left, you can see a colophon from one of the manuscripts, CPB 195, and you can see he gives his name as Kashisha Saliba Barmanaha Gammo. And then on the right, you can see how the styles of these manuscripts are similar. In both cases, you can see the signature, the second signature at the bottom of the leaf. and with a decoration that's very similar in both cases. And this is on the left, you can see Berlin Zachau 95, and on the right is that manuscript from CPB, again, both by the same scribe. And you can see here the very similar interlace design on both manuscripts. In both cases, occupying the whole page. Okay, another very well-known scribe is Haideni Bar Yabo of Gesa, who was active from 1791 to 1825. So we know from the colophons, we can trace he was a deacon at least from 1791 to 1796. This is just the range as far as we know. He may have remained a deacon longer than this. But we know that at the latest, by 1806, he was ordained a priest. We have 12 manuscripts by this scribe known to date. 2 of them are copies of the Book of Protection, or I keep saying copies, I mean manuscripts. I don't like the term copies in this case for the Book of Protection. I'll explain that in a bit. But manuscripts of the Book of Protection. So we have Ryland's manuscript, Syriac 52. This is a composite manuscript, so it's only part 2 that's by this scribe. That was 1795. And Houghton Library, Syriac 163, dated 1809. He also copied an Old Testament commentary, Danat Usame, which is a Himmel manuscript, CPB 123, manuscript of the Peshitta of the Pentateuch, and liturgical books. And his father Yabo was a priest. His grandfather was named Moshe. We don't know if his grandfather was a cleric. He was from Gesa in the Tahuma district in the Hakkari region. Now there's another Haideni Bar Gesa, or another Haideni, also of Tahuma, may be identical to this same person, who's known as an author of hymns in about 1825. So it's possible that this is the same person, but not certain yet. And we know that Haideni's father died by 1822 at the latest. Okay, these are some images from a manuscript by Haideni, which is not a Book of Protection. And so you can see on the left, where it gives this name. So Haideni is on that top line in the highlighted, on the portion that's inside the white rectangle. Haideni at the end of that line, that first line. Okay. And finally, I want to mention briefly Franci Bargis Mere, who was active between 1866 and 1894. He was a deacon for his whole career, as far as we know. And he was very prolific. We have 47 manuscripts by this person, and one of which is a Book of Protection, which we talked about. It's unusual for a Book of Protection. I'll come back to that, which is DFM 417, inscribed in 1883. He copied many books in many different genres. We have his genealogy. So his grandfather is also named Francis. This is a naming tradition that's found even in my own family. So my ancestors go back Michael, Joseph, Michael, Joseph, Michael, Joseph, etc. So this is a common naming tradition, not only in Italy, but also in the Middle East. So his great-grandfather was Yausep, and he was of the family of Mere. And he was from Tel Kepe in northern Iraq. Okay, now we're going to shift a little bit to talk about the purpose of the manuscripts, the purpose for which these manuscripts were produced of the Book of Protection. Most codices of the Book of Protection had an amuletic purpose, exactly like the scrolls that bore the same text and images. The codices were produced for clients who are named both in the text of the charms and in the colophons. The client is referred to in the text of the charms as Ta'in Yude Halain, the bearer of these charms, meaning the one carrying the codex or scroll on which the charms are inscribed. And in many of the colophons, the client is referred to using the formulaic language Alaima Briha Unurba Shapira, the blessed youth, the beautiful shoot. Many of the codices end, at least those that are fully preserved, with a hutama, or conclusion, immediately before the colophon. And here's an especially clear example of this from CSDMA 16. So we see at the top this part of the text is labeled Hotama Dachthava Hade, the conclusion of this book or this writing, referring to the codex itself. And so it's basically a prayer. So it says Barech Mar, Natar Mar, Wasayat Mar, Wasatar Mar, Wa'ader Mar, or Adar Mar, Wafrok Mar, Wafatsa Mar, Washawazev Mar, Menbisha wa Hailawate, Lat'in Yude Halain, Ain wa Amen, which means bless, O Lord, protect, O Lord, succor, O Lord, conceal, O Lord, help, O Lord, save, O Lord, redeem, O Lord, save, O Lord, from evil and its powers, the bearer of these charms, yea and amen, yea and amen. So we see here that the codex itself, referred to as Kethav Tahade, is equated with Yude Halain, these charms, which one is to carry. And here we see the colophon that immediately follows the Hutama in this manuscript. Here again, the manuscript is referred to as Kethav Tahade, the Nutara Nasha, this writing of the protection of people. The scribe says Kethav Ta, Kethav Ta, I inscribed it, with the pronoun suffix referring back to the feminine noun Kethavta. So he inscribed it for the beloved brother, the young man, so-and-so, son of the late so-and-so. The name written in the original ink has been scraped off and replaced in ballpoint pen with another name, which is practically illegible, but this attests to the secondary circulation of the manuscript. This is an especially clear example of the amuletic use of the manuscript of a codex, but there are others that have the same structure with the hutama and the naming of a client in the colophon. The small size of the manuscripts, typically about 8 by 6 centimeters, and the amount of wear and tear on them confirm that they were made to be carried by the clients on their persons as a protection. Earlier descriptions of the manuscripts tended to assume that the codices functioned as handbooks or compendiums from which the scrolls would be copied. In most cases, the evidence of the actual manuscripts makes this assumption impossible to sustain. But we may well ask, could some codices have functioned as handbooks? One of the manuscripts digitized by Himmel, DFM 417, raises this possibility. The manuscript has several characteristics that distinguish it from the typical codex of charms. It lacks a hutama and a colophon with mention of a client, instead ending abruptly after the last charm. And also, it is larger than usual. It's about twice the size of most copies of the Book of Protection. And it also doesn't show the usual wear and tear that we see on these manuscripts. There is one other manuscript that is very similar to DFM 417, and that is New York Public Library Syriac 3. Like DFM 417, so I should point out, this is not a Himmel manuscript. This is owned by the New York Public Library and was not digitized as far as I know. These are my own photographs. Like DFM 417, this manuscript lacks a hotama and a colophon. It also joins the Book of Charms to other texts, a collection of 500 proverbs, and the life of St. George. In both instances, the colophon occurs at the end of the whole manuscript. These two manuscripts are relatively late. DFM 417 is dated 1883, and DFM 417 is dated 1893. A careful consideration of the evidence from these two manuscripts suggests that they represent a specific late development in the history of the tradition, an effort to synthesize variants of individual charms and to synthesize the book as a whole with other texts in the Syriac tradition, the Book of Medicines, Proverbs, and Stories of Saints, to be exact. We see here a concern for categorizing the book in terms of its genre, a concern also evident in the organization of the CSDMA collection, by the way. In the latter, codices of charms occur together with prayer books and hymnals. Other apparent divisions within the collection are medical compendiums and scientific texts going together, and grammars and lexicons going together, and scriptural exegesis and dogmatic theology going together. Therefore, it is possible that these two manuscripts, the one from DFM and the New York Public Library one, functioned as handbooks from which amulets were copied, but the two manuscripts' late place in the tradition and their combining of the Book of Protection with other texts that had no such function makes this doubtful. The purpose of these manuscripts may rather have been to collect and preserve the tradition of the charms for the sake of knowledge. And so I come now to my conclusions. We are not yet at the point where we can get a complete picture of practice related to these charms. There are remaining questions such as, how would they be carried exactly? What would the production of a manuscript look like, and who would be present? Questions like these may be impossible to answer based on digital manuscripts alone, or even on manuscripts alone. But combining the evidence from digital preservation with other data, we can understand much more than would otherwise be possible about the culture, about the culture in which these manuscripts were produced and the individuals who produced them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David, for this interesting talk and giving us the opportunity to have an insight into your research. It was really interesting. Maybe you could just have the presentation shared with us. That would be great, because I think there will be a lot of questions, and then it's easier.
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Oh. I'm sorry, I must have done that inadvertently. I will go back. There, okay.
Great. So, and Joanne has the first question, not Richard.
Yes, never mind, it's a long story. But just on the subject of manuscripts being copied together with other manuscripts, we have a similar phenomenon in ancient Mesopotamia, where at certain centers anyway, you do get completely unrelated texts that are put together on the same manuscript. However, they are unrelated only in the sense that they belong to separate compositions, which are separately used. They are put together apparently to save space, to save clay, which is rare. And they usually have things that are related together with one another. When they do this, it's not just a random scatter. These are things that would have some relevance to each other. So I would then ask you some of the things that are together with it. Can you discern any obvious connection why this particular collection, are they all the same? That's another related question. Do you have the same set of things in them? Apparently not, from something you've sort of hinted. Is there any connection between what's the content of the book or the presence of the book and the things that they're putting with it? So for example, St. George would be a fairly obvious, person to help you against demons or whatever. So, and the more intriguing one is the commentary on the Book of Revelations, which I'd like you, if you could unpack for us.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So let's talk about DFM 417 real quick. This is the one that combines the Book of Protection with the Book of Medicines.
Right.
And it actually in this manuscript, both texts are called Book of Medicines. So we have the Book of Protection, but it's titled Safar Sammane, Book of Medicines, by the scribes. So and here I think the connection between the Book of Protection and the Book of Medicines is evident. They serve similar purposes of healing and such. In fact, it's interesting. You can find in the first half of the manuscript a charm against, whatever, toothache. And then in the second half of the manuscript, you can find the physical recipe that you could use for toothache. You can really match the contents. And in this volume, recently published, Studies in the Syriac Magical Traditions, published by edited by Marco Morigi and Siam Bairo. Siam Bairo has an article about the continuation of the ancient Mesopotamian tradition of a religious functionary combining the functions of a doctor and a charms practitioner. So this is kind of an enduring tradition in the East Syriac sphere. And so certainly I think in this case, it's clear why we have these two things put together. In the case of the New York Public Library manuscript, the charms, the proverbs, and the story of St. George go together as kind of folk literature. And as you mentioned, the story of St. George is also very relevant to the Book of Protection, which includes the anathema of St. George. And so, I think in these cases, so the reason why these texts are joined is a big question. And as I see it, these manuscripts are late enough that I could see this being really a scholarly effort, where the idea is there's an effort to try to categorize the genre of the charms and kind of join it for the purpose of knowledge for its own sake.
Just one quick comment. The relationship between the two healing professionals is not what it's normally said. You do not have a charm specialist with an actual healer. That's completely false, actually. What you have is a single person who diagnoses illness and then treats the patient himself, and another person who does not diagnose illness, a pharmacist basically, who specializes in and who could, give you something if you came in with a headache, or something like that. He could give you something independently, or if you'd had it already diagnosed by the physician, he would fill it in the way that we fill things in modern pharmacies, possibly with the ingredients that he's supposed to give as well. And some of the things are written by the so-called magic expert. Now, what that does for it, though, is an interesting one. The match between the two things in Mesopotamian tradition, basically, you put it's frequent that the medical treatment and the recitation which goes with it are on separate tablets, are actually separately. So what you might be seeing here is taking the recitations that go with those treatments simply being put back together with them. And originally, as practiced, that you would have accompanied, it opens a whole new dimension to the question of these books of charms, is when you get down to the brass tacks specificity, it's possible that when medicines were applied from the Book of Medicines, that you were meant always to recite the charm, the relevant charm from the Book of Protection with it. Okay, so that's just to raise that for you.
I see. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to have you here, Joanne, because not being an Assyriologist myself, I wouldn't have known that. So, so with the DFM 417, it's interesting because the join of the two texts is secondary.
Yeah.
You can see here, like, so there's the end of the Book of Protection on the right, and you can see the wear on the leaf there. So this was originally the end of one manuscript. And then there's an intervening leaf with some reader's notes on it, which was originally the flyleaf of the real Book of Medicines that follows. So it's, you know, for whatever reason, they were created as separate books and apparently circulated by themselves, but then later were joined. And we don't know exactly who made the join. It could have been the original scribe at some later point in his life, or it could have been someone else later on. We don't know. But
well, as I said, this would actually further the perpetuation of memory, that originally they would have known which one went with which one. But now that that they belong together, and now as you begin to lose the tradition, you want to preserve which things were supposed to go with which things, or that just to make the statement that these two things should be performed together, which might or might not be something people still knew. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much. I think the next person was Gabi, who had a question.
Yeah. As I know, the oldest manuscript or amulet dated to the beginning of the 18th century. You presented once, I think it's manuscript with Hormizd, Hormizd, dated to the 1615, the beginning of the 17th century. How do you explain this new manuscript?
Yes, so
where it is now.
Okay, this is the one from Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And the manuscript itself is not a manuscript of the Book of Protection. It includes the metrical life of Rabban Hormizd, followed by another text by Abdishol Barbricha. Wait, I think that's right. I might be forget. Anyway, it at least has the life of Rabban Hormizd. But the illustration is what's of interest, and it's possible that the illustration comes from another manuscript, but the text above the illustration does not correspond, at least to any known copy. Well, I should say a copy that I know of the anathema of Rabban Hormizd. It is a prayer. It seems like it's in the first person of Hormizd himself. And it mentions the Kalbe Fekre, the rabid dogs, having Rabban Hormizd's power over these creatures. And so it's relevant, certainly, to the tradition of the Book of Protection. But in my analysis, I think the leaf actually comes from this same manuscript. I think it's just a misplaced leaf from the manuscript. And my reason for saying that is that the ink, the colors, the decorative style, the handwriting, everything is identical to the rest of the manuscript. And the size of the leaf also, which if this were a copy of the Book of Protection, it would be much larger than expected. This is a rather large book. So, yeah, the reason I share this is that I think it's relevant to the early development of the artistic style that we see in the Book of Protection later. It's the exact same motif that we find with the anathema of Rabban Hormizd, the mounted saint spearing the demon.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. I think the next person is Anna.
Yes, thank you, David, for this fascinating talk and a lot of material we need to think about. I have two questions. In fact, one is about this same slide. Maybe it's not a question, but just a point. When we see such a text, which you define as a prayer, I have seen this text before, and I tried to read it and to think if it is a prayer or a charm. I came to a conclusion that we cannot define this with certainty. And this is, I think, a very interesting case because without a context, a clear context, and without the beginning and the end of this text, we cannot say if it is a prayer or a charm. Yes, and but this is not a question. My question was about this Sliva Jammu manuscript. Can you go to this slide, please?
Okay, I'm sorry, which manuscript?
About the scribe Sliva Jammu.
Okay, thank you, yes, okay.
Zahar 95.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
almost there.
and yes, with his
There we go. Yes. Okay. Yep.
his writings, yes. Oh, and can you say again what is on the left?
So this is CPB 195. It's from the Chaldean Patriarchate of Babylon in Baghdad. And this one, CPB 195, is a manuscript of the lives of saints. I can't remember which saint's life is on here or which ones. I have to check that, but yeah, it's a manuscript of saints' lives.
Okay, and you probably have found this manuscript because in the Wilmshurst book, that
Actually, so
to the same scribe.
So okay, some manuscripts that are by this scribe are known from Wilmshurst, but this one I found from doing a search on the scribe's name in VHML on the online. So this one is not mentioned by Wilmshurst as far as I know.
Yes, because me and our colleague Dua Rashid, who is also present here today, we worked with Berlin Zachau 95 and also one more manuscript, which is also ascribed to Sliva Jammu, which is Berlin 345. You know,
great.
probably this manuscript, yes? And we came to a conclusion that this 345 manuscript is a copy of Zachau 95.
Oh, really?
Our first conclusion. And our second conclusion that it could not be really ascribed to the same scribe. So
I see.
It is some fake. So, and in your slide, I can suspect, but I'm not such a specialist in these handwritings. How can you say, can this also be the case with these two manuscripts? Because for me, they look quite different, not like the same hand.
Yeah, the pen is definitely different because the strokes are of different thickness. But the hand, so I'm not a paleographer myself. And my main reason for joining these as by the same scribe was the mention of the scribe's name in the colophon. So yes, it is possible that one was copied from a manuscript by this scribe, and also the colophon was copied. I don't know that this was a very common phenomenon to copy both the manuscript with the colophon with the original scribe's name.
I have this phenomenon also, yes, in other Syriac manuscripts, yes. But this is a very interesting case because when we look at this Berlin 345, the scribe is even less skilled than this one of Zachau 95, and it's very clear from this, yes, from his handwriting.
I see. So it's interesting here, the Berlin Zachau 95 is very early in this scribe's career. Do you think it's possible that this is just because he was very young at the time and still learning his handwriting?
I don't think so, because when we found this date of Berlin 345, it is made, if I'm right, if I'm not mistaken, 20 years after this 95.
I see.
And it is worse. So,
And
he was regretting.
that's the,
Yes, if it
but
was
the,
scribe.
okay, but the handwriting on the Berlin manuscript, can you tell if it matches either of these manuscripts, or?
No, it doesn't. No.
Oh, it's a totally different hand. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, because I don't know. In this one case, I could, not being a paleographer, my untrained mind could imagine the Zachau 95 being simply, by the same, the features of the handwriting are similar, but maybe the scribe was still very young and still learning his calligraphy. So I don't know. I'm leaving that open as a possibility, but I think this is very interesting what you say, because this opens up a whole new avenue of investigation.
Yes.
So thank you very much. I think this is definitely something to follow up on.
Yeah, and I think if Zoom shows it correctly, we have one other person, Erica.
Thank you very much, David, for a very informative and excellent talk. I want to pick up 2 points that have come up in discussion. The first is about the book of so-called different medical traditions. And at Turfan, we have not only the prayer amulets, which I talked about last week, but we also have several fragments of actual pharmaceutical recipes, naming all sorts of different ingredients. They're written in New Persian, but in Syriac script, and they are from the site of Bulaik, which the Chinese at this very moment are excavating. So, and I believe Syriac manuscripts have been found. So what I'm saying is, you do find the two traditions juxtaposed at at Turfan. How they act together, of course, remains to be determined. But the other point that I wanted to raise, and that harks back to the Mesopotamian tradition, is if you scroll down to the little chap that had the scimitar, the unmounted chap. No, keep going.
Not this one.
No, further on.
Okay. Yes.
The Orthodox one.
Yeah, ASOM. Yeah.
Yeah, this one.
There we go.
If you look at the iconography and Montgomery magisterial book, despite copious amounts that have been written on incantation bowls, Montgomery's book is still magisterial. He will have illustrations from incantation bowls from Nippur showing that type of iconography. Now, I'm not an iconographer, but I did write on the collection of the British Museum and tried to classify the iconography, and they always have the feet outturned. I think you're quite right. The strokes are shackles probably, and the hands are outturned too. So there is a similarity in the iconography, but apart from that, but I just wanted to point out that these old traditions, of course, have a longevity. But it might be worthwhile for those of you who are interested in iconography to look at Montgomery. I think myself that much of the iconography probably emerges in 15th, 16th centuries, influenced by local traditions as well. The rider saint and the sort of decoration, but of course that belongs to a different sphere, and I'm not an expert in that. But anyway, just to say thank you very much. And one of the things I did want to emphasize or to bring up is I very much liked your emphasis on the role of these items within the tradition of the Church of the East and also the Orthodox Church. And I really wonder whether we should be calling them charms, because how does that reflect the user? That might reflect our attitudes to this literature, attitudes that are very much honed by post-Enlightenment thinking about vernacular literature. And it would be very interesting to have some idea from within the communities of how they actually viewed the charms, these items. And I say that because some years ago I had a talk with a very senior cleric of the Church of the East, and he was initially very dismissive of these items until I talked to him in private, where he knew he wouldn't be compromised, and he displayed a very different attitude and actually said it was part of their religious repertoire. So that what I'm trying to say is that the communities are very conscious of 2 centuries of Western interpretation of their vernacular tradition. And it might be something we think about when we're thinking about who uses them and the purposes, how we term these items. And anyway, thank you, David, for an excellent talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate your comments and your comment there. I mean, it's a very interesting question of the terminology. And I have to be honest, I don't really like the term charm, which I use a lot for these things. I also try to avoid the term magic. I know we had this discussion last week after your presentation, so the thing is, within the tradition, what they're doing, they never refer to it as magic. There are terms for that in Syriac, as you know. The only time that magic appears in these books is naming what the charms protect you against. So there are charms against, or I say charms again, there are sections of the book against incantations by sorcerers. But the charms themselves are never referred to by that term. And interestingly, so we have the way we do our imaging, it's done in the field, usually by local people at the monasteries or libraries where we digitize in Himmel. And when we get the images, they often include field metadata. So they try to identify the text, and they try to describe the dimensions, which we can't know from the images. So in the field metadata for the CSDMA manuscripts, those 2, they were not described as charms or magic. They were described as exorcisms, books of exorcism, and which I think is interesting. And anyway, Helene Mora Vandenberg has written on the links between this corpus and the ritual texts. In the West Syriac sphere, this is also evident because you have similar texts included in priests' manuals that have like the right for marriage and the right for all kinds of other things. So yeah, this is definitely something that should be explored more thoroughly, the classification of what it is that the tradition itself thinks it's doing.
Nicholas Algilu, who's done so much work on the ground amongst the communities, I might write to him and ask him what he thinks. An exorcism, of course, within the Anglican Church is an absolute ritual. It is not regarded as magic. It is an absolute ritual that you refer to should you need to, and the priest will perform it. And it's certainly not a magical rite.
Thank you.
And anyway, give my best wishes to Calabro if you see him.
I will. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, he might be just a few doors down from me right now if he's in his office. Thank you.
If I may interject here, to just
Of course.
explain from the last time where I'm coming from. And I said, in the tradition I have, what you're using the term magic to refer to what we would call sorcery. That's kishbu, it's sanctioned, it's evil, nobody admits to practicing it, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this applies. However, and then there's sort of religion properly speaking, which has to do with what the gods, care and feeding of the gods. But then there's another category, which falls into the category you're talking about, exorcisms and healing rites and things of that nature, anti-witchcraft things and so forth, which has a separate specialist who does just that. And it's the same person who does the medicine, by the way. So it's sort of a healing art. And faute de mieux, and I said, if I would prefer to use the emic terms for it as well. I mean, there's Shangutu, and there's Ashiputu, and the two are completely intertwined with one another. So what I'm calling magic is something which is not incompatible with religion. It's not socially sanctioned. It's not evil at all. In fact, the two are a pair, a matched pair, that the things you do for the gods to keep them happy and, please them and so forth, make them available to be guarantors, literally, of the rites that are performed in order for personal problems, for healing, but also for success in business and all sorts of positive things that you might wish to, where you need a little bit of divine help to make them happen. So I'm sorry for the terminology. I mean, so we're crossed there. I just wanted to explain that we were not really having an argument. It was a problem with the terminology, which was tripping it up. For us, magic is one thing and sorcery is another. And so it's in the good category. It's positive. It's connected to religion in a very intimate way. And the two of them reinforce one another. If there were no gods or no religion, there would be it would not be possible to perform the quote unquote magical rites that I'm talking about. I just wanted to explain that. Right. I didn't want to leave that left over from the last time. So we're actually not, there's no disagreement actually here involved as to what we're talking about. I have no problems with that. And I understand that magic has got this horrible pejorative thing, and Western people tend to put that on. And yeah, I don't like to use it either, but I can call it Ashiputu, but everybody will look at me like, what are you talking about? But they're often translated. Ashiputu is.
How about Heka?
Yeah, well, no, Heka is very different. Heka is a completely neutral term that could refer to either good stuff or bad stuff. This is an Egyptian conceptualization. It's entirely a matter of whether you're doing it to somebody else or they're doing it to you, and that has nothing to do with the Mesopotamian.
Well, it's appropriate in this case only because it captures the connection between public ritual and private practice, which is really a porous border in this tradition as well as in Egypt. But yeah. It's porous in a good way. Yeah, well, it's porous though. Be careful, because Heka is definitely in the negative form. They had a really negative attitude towards their gods, who were essentially might as well be demons, essentially, by anybody else. And there are exorcisms against their gods. Okay, so basically, Heka is not a positive thing at all. It's completely the negative end of the spectrum, whereas the Mesopotamian version is completely at the positive end, and the negative stuff is pulled off and is something completely separate. So anyway, so that's just what I wanted to say. So yeah, thank you. So yeah, I mean,
clear the air from last time. I'm sorry, like sort of a carryover, but we didn't have time to go into that. So I just wanted to position myself. I'm not trying to say this is evil or sanctioned or wrong. I think it's wonderful. I love this stuff. I think it's just marvelous expression of the human soul, basically, and it's just removing it or banishing it or getting rid of it, like the Western tradition tends to want to do, is just a terrible, it eats the soul, basically. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the terminology, we have a number of problems that are difficult to tackle, no matter which way you look at it, because we have a difference between the term that the community itself uses, and then our scholarly use of the term to describe what we're studying, and it has to be something that makes sense to people. The term ritual power has come into use in some circles, which I actually like that term, but to many people would say, what is ritual power? What does that mean? Magic makes a lot of sense to people, but especially if I'm talking at a dinner party or something, nobody's going to know what ritual power is. But we have anyway. So It's
I'm
a big
sorry,
problem.
may I add
David, you
something
have
to
the
the
brief then
discussion?
to inform them.
Excuse me,
Yes,
may I
yes,
interrupt?
Alexei.
The community, like the Assyrians, they sometimes call it Hirze, and the manuscript from Kazan is entitled Sedra Herzaya. And this Arabic term is definitely related to, it is charm, it is amulet. And I don't see here any problem to relate it to what you call magic. So you say that communities calls it something different, but at least Assyrians in Russia call it Hirzi. In the collection of Sado, you have these envelopes which cover these manuscripts. And on this envelope, it is written Hirzi in Russian writing.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's
there
a
is
good
some
point.
relation to magic.
Yeah, and I think there's been some shift there over time because,
Maybe.
you know, we're looking back over a century, and I think there, even within the tradition of the charms, I think we see a gradual shift where the charms are not circulating anymore. Well, no, I shouldn't say it that way. There begins to be, along with the circulation of the charms, kind of a scholarly interest in them, even from within the community. And I think there, you know, there's definitely multiple faces to the issue because in one sense, there was a need to explain to the West what these things are. And there was, we know, even from accounts of like Percy Badger, that the indigenous, the community knew that that it was kind of, that it was regarded badly in the West to do this kind of thing. So there was kind of a shame in presenting this to the West. But then, you know, who knows what they would say, you know, when Percy Badger wasn't looking. So I don't know. Anyway, it's a problem with many facets.
May I ask you another question?
Sure.
And this is a question, actually a question to, not only to you. I mean that I welcome any comments from anybody here. What do you think? What was the reason that we have so little evidence of this activity from Orthodox world, from the Turabdin, from these places? Because we have collected, we have information of like 100 manuscripts like that, and only 5 of them, from my overview, may be referred to West. What was the reason? Why?
That's a very big question. I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that. It's a good question.
It's very perceptive, Alexei. You're absolutely right. I've seen manuscripts as far west as Bukhtan, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I know one manuscript from Hassana. You know the village Hassana? It is the, you know, this region near Jizre. It's near to Rabdin, just before Tigris. I mean, just before Tigris. So it's the westernmost manuscript. It is located in Mechelen in Belgium, but it is difficult to get it. We work on it. So I don't know. Definitely they had something in Turabdin, but less. Maybe the church, maybe the Orthodox Church was more hostile to it than in the East. I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I mean, and I mentioned these manuscripts, which I know, Alexei, you're already aware of, the these West Syriac priests manuals that incorporate very similar types of things in both Arabic, Garshuni, and Syriac. So maybe it was partially a matter of classification, that they weren't considered to be a separate thing, but really part of the priest's repertoire that should be incorporated into ritual books. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good question.
I think we
that should
have a
be
comment
explored.
from Gregory.
Grigory, yes.
Yeah. Grigory Keshe,
Hello.
please.
Yes.
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So I think I have answers. So why we have so few manuscripts from the Syrian Orthodox tradition? I don't remember where I read it, but this type of manuscripts were forbidden by bishops, and so they were, if they were produced and used, then they were held in among families in private hands. So no church or monastery would allow to have such manuscripts in their collections. And on the other hand, in the East Syriac tradition, where apparently less, so especially in this period of 17th, 18th century, the ecclesiastical power was less strict, and so we have more manuscripts preserved of this genre.
Oh, thank you. But there should be the reasons why this ecclesiastical power was less strict, but it's a bigger question.
Could I just make a comment, Gregory? That's very pertinent, but I also think we have to look at the socio-geographical distribution. The Church of the East communities in the Hakkari were very much very remote, and they have different language patterns to the churches basically on the Nineveh plain. And it would be very interesting to know which of these manuscripts were actually produced by the Church of the East and which may have come from the Chaldean Church, because I certainly know even today amongst the communities in Iraq, the Church of the East communities were regarded as quite disjointed from the rest of, probably till about 20 years ago, from the rest of the community. So geographically and linguistically, of course, the communities on the Nineveh plain were Arabic speaking, or had Syriac in the liturgy. So I think that there are socio-geographical factors that may also perhaps facilitate or underlie why you have this production of literature, which is actually a very rich source of vernacular literary production, which doesn't seem to happen in the urban environments. Now, I could be very wrong, but I do think that it is linked with the former demographic distribution of the Church of the East communities, who were still Syriac speaking. So that's where I think somehow there is a divergent tradition that managed to, well, it emerged and survived, and possibly in the Nineveh Plains area, a lot more European contact, a lot of Catholic influence from the mid-16th century, and so you have these traditions perhaps not so prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very, very interesting remark. Do you mind if we stop at this moment the official part of this lecture, and I have some sort of private question we will discuss. Okay, I will stop the recording. I'm sorry.